Hello and welcome back to Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, in which we talk about writing, editing, publishing, advertising, everything to do with this crazy business that we're in called self-publishing. I'm Roland Hume, and of course, the host of Hidden Gems is Craig Touch. And today we're going to be discussing beta readers, or beta readers. I'm never sure how to pronounce that. The importance of having other people help you develop your stuff. And we have two extremely special guests who are very excited to talk to you about that. The first is Lisa M. Lilly, who writes mysteries, supernatural thrillers, and a bunch of books about writing, which are extremely useful. So definitely check those out. And we also have Helen Yeomans, who is a former editor and now an author of thrillers and a successful children's book. And this is the one that I really liked learning about recently, the best-selling book about Christmas carols, which I thought was quite a thing to have up there. So how are you both doing this morning?
So nice to be here.
It is indeed.
And Craig, good morning. How are you doing? This is Craig Touch, an author himself and the founder of Hidden Gems. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. I'm really happy to get Lilly and Helen on here to talk about beta reading today, because that's we have a beta reader service, but even aside from that, it's something that we've always talked about on the website as something that authors should be using in general, regardless of where they find their beta readers, in order to improve their writing. And that's often something you want to get done ahead of sending your book out to reviewers and such, which is what authors tend to also want to do. But those are two discrete things, and the feedback you get from beta readers isn't typically public, whereas the reviews are. So you definitely want to get sort of that audience feedback first to tell you whether or not you should, whether your book is hitting the mark, whether there's anything you need to change, and then send it out to reviews when you know that everything is polished and ready to go.
I was going to start off and say maybe the first question we should ask for those of people listening in is, what is a beta reader?
Right. So, I mean, I'm going to pass it off to, so first of all, let me just say that both Lilly and Helen have used beta readers before from a variety of sources, which is why we were happy to have them on to give their perspective, right? I don't want it to just be me talking about it, because then it's really sort of specific to what I know about it, what our service does, and it's not meant to be that. I want to have this sort of grander discussion about beta readers in general. But quickly, a beta reader is somebody that you would send your book to prior to publication to get feedback on your book, on sort of like things like pacing, characterization, story, plot, all that sort of thing. It's not meant to be an editor, right? The beta reader is not meant to fix your spelling and grammar mistakes. They're supposed to be telling you more about the story and what works and what doesn't, whereas an editor is sort of fixing errors and such. I mean, you can get developmental editing, which is maybe more similar to beta reading than any other kind, but that's a much more expensive thing than a beta reader, and it's also more of an editing thing. So, but let's hear from Lilly and Helen. Lilly, why don't you start us off? What are your thoughts on that?
I think for me, the most helpful thing is they give you a reader perspective versus I started writing long before the internet, where you would workshop your work with other writers, and that can be helpful, but they are more saying, oh, here's how you could fix this. A lot of writers want to tell you how to write something, and I think of beta readers, they're much more looking at it from, I love mysteries or I love thrillers, and here's what really grabbed me, and here's where I got bored. So I feel like they are almost like advanced readers who, as you mentioned, they give you that feedback before you see it in a review, before you get a review that says, oh, the pace was just so slow, or I didn't finish it. You hear that first from the beta readers.
Right. Yeah. And Helen, anything to add onto that?
I agree with everything Lilly said. I do think it's important on us as writers to give our work as decent a look before we hand it over to beta readers, because we don't want them bogged down in trivia that it is going to be settled later by a proofreader or an editor. We don't want them worried about typos and stuff like that, although they will tell you about them, but that's fine. I want my beta readers to read the book as a reader. In fact, I've put up an ad for my mailing list, telling them I want more beta readers and telling them the difference between a beta reader and an ARC reviewer. And some people like to be both. But beta readers, we want, as Lisa said, to read the story as a reader. And if this part is bogging you down or is not interesting, tell me about it. And if you can tell me why, that's even better. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's especially great if you have a couple of them and they don't understand something. I find that very helpful. The thing that was so clear in my mind, and someone says, "Wait, were they on the edge of a river, or was that a waterfall behind them?" And I think, okay.
But I find you have to be careful when you look at the work of two beta readers, both of whom have a problem with this part. And you have to determine, is that because of something you said or because of something you didn't say? In other words, is something missing or has it been badly explained? Beta readers can really throw up some stuff that seems odd, and you've got to get behind what they're saying and figure out why they're saying it sometimes, which is why, personally, I would never want a lot of beta readers. I think 5's my maximum because there's so much work.
Yeah, and I mean, I think from the opposite end of it, you don't want one because, it's the same sort of thing where you were saying you had a couple readers had an issue with something, right? But if you have, and then, if 2 people or 3 people or whatever have an issue with something, there's something there, right? But if one person says something, it could be something to do with that person, you don't always know. And so it's not that there's no value in having one beta reader, but there's a lot more value in having more than one. But definitely there's a point where it's, you don't need 100 of them. You don't need the same number of beta readers as you need ARC readers. Like most people want as many reviews as possible, whereas with the beta readers, like you're saying, there's work involved for the author where you have to go through all that information, and hopefully most of the people are sort of having trouble with the same sorts of things, so you don't need 20 people telling you that they didn't know there was a waterfall there. Hearing it from 3 or 5 or whatever is probably enough, right?
Yes,
absolutely.
Is there, how many do you usually look for, Lily? Or Lisa, sorry.
That's okay. Everyone does it. It's a hazard.
I noticed we've been doing it.
It depends. When I was writing my earlier novels, my first series, I usually had at least 3. Now I have 2 who read my mysteries for plot issues, and then another one who reads completely separately for, they're very Chicago based. That's where I live, but I have a reader who also lives in Chicago, but in a different part. And it's very helpful for me to have her perspective on, hey, I didn't even understand this or that, or I never heard of this. So she's sort of my Chicago beta reader. So 3 is the most that I have.
Yeah, that's cool to have somebody that is good for specific things, right? And often with a beta reader, there's something, I don't know if you guys are familiar with using them or not, but the idea of sensitivity readers, right? Where they're beta readers that are specifically used to read for topics that you might be not handling as well as you can, or you might be saying some things or using terminology that you shouldn't use. And sensitivity readers are often are used sort of like you use your Chicago reader, where their job is more not necessarily to go through the entire, I mean, they can do that as well to give you feedback on the book, but also to be very carefully looking at the sensitive issues. For example, like if you're writing an LGBT book, you'd want somebody, and especially if you're not, as familiar with those topics, you'd want somebody who is to read through that and make sure you're not, offending anyone or saying the wrong things or whatever. Or if sometimes, with PTSD or with, there's anything really that somebody might take wrong if you don't present it properly, sensitive. I don't know. Have you guys ever used any of those?
I haven't yet. The closest I come to that is I had one of my mysteries that focused on a man who was wrongfully imprisoned, and I did talk with someone who had been through the prison system to talk about that effect. And I shouldn't say wrongfully, he's awaiting trial, and kind of the pressures that puts on someone who can't afford bail. So I got feedback on that from someone who had been in that exact spot, and kind of how that affected him.
Because I guess that must be very difficult to like envision if you haven't been through it yourself. So that's kind of like vital input to get.
Yeah. And then finding those people sometimes is, I guess, hard too, because, you depending on what you're looking for, it could be very niche, and then you got to find somebody who, but at that point too, like it's almost like research, right? Like you might talk to that person just even at the planning stages before you even do your writing, to sort of as research as well, right? And then somebody, that same person or somebody else afterwards, to make sure when you did write it, you handled it all properly, right? Helen, have you ever used any of those?
Well, in a different way, or a way somewhat similar to Lisa, my two mainstay beta readers are in England. They're colleagues from my editing days, and as well as writers themselves, one in fiction, one in non, which gives them interesting, different reactions to my stuff. But I wanted North American readers because my primary market is North America. And so that was a reason for getting additional readers, was having people over here. So, but in terms of specifics, I'm more into what you said. I hope to get the research done before I write or while I'm writing on whether it's, my latest book has a Black woman in it. And she's a Canadian, but I'm obviously really careful on that kind of thing. And I did a tremendous lot of research before writing her character. And I waited for feedback from my American readers and got nothing but good stuff. So, but I don't know if any of them are Black. And so I just hope that everything's okay there. She's one of the good guys. So she's being presented in a positive light. It's just that, you try and be careful about stuff like that because it's so sensitive.
Yeah, these days, it's the culture we live in now. There's a lot of that sort of awareness and focus on sort of making sure that everyone is saying things the right way. And, we're seeing that a lot in Canada. We're talking about, I'm Canadian, whatever. We have a lot of stuff with going on here with various things. But anyway, so in terms of that covers some of the ideas of who makes a good reader, right? So like people that are reading and people that are, sensitive readers. So maybe they're focused on certain areas. People that are familiar with your genre, right? You don't want to necessarily have a person that really only reads romance be your beta reader for your thriller book, right? They should obviously have some experience reading your genre. But who doesn't make a good beta reader? And I think that people that haven't used beta readers before, because of the difficulty maybe in finding them or in the cost, they might try to cut corners by doing stuff like asking their friends and family, which personally I don't think is a good idea, right? Because how honest are they going to be? And really with beta reading, you want honesty, right? To the point of, you want them not to be rude or or try to they still should understand that you're a person with feelings, so that you hopefully they'll be careful in how they word their criticisms, right? But you don't want them to just say, "Oh, I loved it," which is something that probably your mom would say.
That's right. That's what your family says. So you don't count them as beta readers.
Exactly. But I have heard of people, telling me, "Oh, I had some beta readers," and then I dig into it a bit. It was like, "Yeah, I sent to my friends." Well, how honest of an opinion are they going to give you, right?
It's funny. My dad's always been merciless. He's been like, "Nope, it's terrible." He'd make a great beta reader.
True. I mean, different people have different families and friends, so it is.
But as you said, when you know that somebody is not giving you fake praise, then it makes it so much more valuable. And so it's like you can have somebody who's harsh about things, but when they are then fair about things, I think the ability to take criticism is like such a foundational thing to being a successful writer.
Yeah, you have to have not just a thick skin, but I feel like seek out criticism, because it really does help you improve your work. But it's important to know your tolerance level. If it's your first book, you may need to give it to some friends and family who will encourage you, and then pick maybe 1 or 2 beta readers who will give you the critique, rather than only getting the critiques. Because I've talked to writers who get so discouraged, and that can be a risk too. But definitely down the road, I think you really need that critique.
That's very good advice, I think, for a first writer. Get the encouragement to bolster you, and then get a couple of beta readers, people who don't know you. You've got to have that stuff, and you've got to get used to having it if you want to grow.
Yeah, so, absolutely. There's value in sending to people that will praise it for sure, right? It's just the idea is that you have to keep in mind that, the information and that feedback you get back from them isn't necessarily the same as what you would get back from a complete stranger. And it's not always a conscious thing, right? It doesn't, they're not like necessarily reading it and saying in their heads, like, I'm going to tell them this is the best thing ever. They're reading it because they know you. And through that lens, it's going to paint the picture a little bit differently. Not even only focusing on what works and what doesn't, but there could be things that, from depending on the book and depending on, the topic, if it's something that's close to you in your life and what you've grown up knowing and living through, and then you hand it over to somebody who had those same experiences as you're going to get a feedback that is through a different lens than a complete stranger who's reading that without that, right? So there might be things that make sense to your friends and family that wouldn't make sense to somebody who didn't have those experiences, right? And that's why it's really important to hear that other feedback for sure.
I've even found that with repeat beta readers. I have one who's read every book in my mystery series. And part of the problem is he knows the characters so well, and he has a great memory. And then, so he won't have any problem with, here comes this recurring character for the first time in the book. He knows who it is. But I had another beta reader who had also read the books, but longer ago. Her memory's not that great. And she's like, you need more to introduce these characters. You're throwing them at the readers, and they aren't going to remember. Where my one, like the person who reads everything I write, yeah, he knows right away who I'm talking about. And that's risky too sometimes.
Yeah. And that's a good point. I think a lot of people also look at it from the sense when they're writing a series that is meant to be standalone, let's say, I think often it's helpful to make sure that at least 1 or 2 of your beta readers have not read, the other ones, so that they can tell you whether it truly is standalone. You might think it is, and your idea of it might be, but you might be sort of writing with sort of, the history in mind, and sort of sometimes translating that onto the page, assuming some information that a new reader wouldn't have, right?
Right.
Sure. Yeah. And then I think the beta readers that, come from your own list of fans and your own mailing list, let's say, right? I think you guys, I think one of you mentioned using somebody from your list, so that's a good source. If there's somebody that, gives you good feedback, it's a good source of that. You just have to, I think, in my opinion, one of the things you have to be careful of is, sometimes somebody that signs up to your list because they're a fan or even a super fan, they might have some of the same biases that your friends and family have, where they like you and they like your writing. They're already a fan of you and your writing. So they're going to have a bias towards liking most of what you write, right? And some people, of course, can keep those things separate, but it's just something to sometimes think about is, sometimes a stranger can give you a better sort of perspective on that, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And
go right ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, you both mentioned using sort of the same beta readers for multiple books, right? So I guess you've found ones that work. Do you seek out a few new ones each time and then use a couple that like familiar ones as well and sort of mix it up? Or
I've got my I've got my two stalwarts who've read all my stuff, but who are able to be critical of the structure and all the elements. But I've done quite a lot of looking around for new readers because, as you say, I want people who don't know me. You can get people who will do it for nothing. The Hidden Gems two I got, or two of the three I think I got from you, were good, two. One was good, one was so-so. But there are people out there who will do the job, but who cost money. And I don't mind paying to get that quality feedback. And you do get a higher level of feedback from them than you might from somebody who is just a reader. And I like both. I love it when people say, I really like that character and why. Or I really didn't think that character worked and why. But I also like people who can tell me everything they want to tell me about the structure and the flow and the dialogue and the everything. And I've found some good sources, and I will use one or two of them the next time round. I do beta readers in stages. So I use two people first, and then I revise, and then I send it out to more beta readers. Just because if you can get the bad stuff out of the way, then you can get a truer look at how the book really works. Now, I've got to say that just to finish, sorry, my first novel had 40 drafts. My latest novel had 5. And I thought I was done after draft 2 until the roof fell in and I got told what was wrong. So I went on for 3 more. But the point is, you've got to get a lot of spade work out of the way from those initial reads. And then you really need somebody to take a look at it with all that stuff cleared away, the debris, where they can get a truer reaction. That's my experience anyway.
Yeah, I'm curious, Helen, I've never used paid beta readers. Did you find them by referrals or was there a service?
I found a service online, but I had my children's book won an award from the Wishing Shelf Readers in England. And they have some top quality services of all kinds. And 2 of their beta readers knocked my socks off with their resumes. And I thought, and they were both North Americans because I specified that's what I wanted. So they're going to be a source for me, but they are expensive. It's just that my 2 originals, one of them I think has had enough. So I need to find a replacement for her. So, it's an ongoing thing. But I will also go back to Craig's service because I got 2 good reads from those people. And they cost me, what did they cost me? I forget now, but it wasn't much.
Yeah, it depends. The service depends on various factors like length of book and, how many, so there's a bunch of different
questions.
Factors.
Yes.
Yeah, a number of questions you're asking, how much time basically it's going to take to do it. But But yeah, I mean, we try to keep the price reasonable. I know that you can sometimes find beta readers that are cheaper and some that are much more expensive. But, in general, we're trying to keep it at a sort of reasonable level. And, but to your point, like even with our service, we have a number of, it's similar to how the ARC runs, where we have a number of people in the beta reader pool, obviously far smaller because it's more a hand-picked a group as opposed to the ARC readers, which is like anybody who wants to read and review, right? But authors can not only rate the reviewers that read their book, and that helps us sort of as on an ongoing basis determine if somebody is doing a good job and we should keep using them or not, but also you can request that the same reader read your next book, assuming that they sign up for it, right? So if a bunch of people signed up for your book and you had requested one of them, then we would make sure that that was one that we gave you. And to the flip side, you can block certain readers. So if you didn't like the one, you can set it so that they never can get any of your future beta books. So try to sort of handle that idea of being able to use the same readers over and over again if that's something you wanted to. Yeah.
I said one yes, one no to your readers. And the reason I said no to the one was because I really didn't think she'd read it or read it with comprehension. I'm not defending inaccuracies or errors, but I mean, she simply didn't get things that had been explained. And so
could be that they didn't understand it, or I don't know.
Just it didn't grab her attention, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the whole thing we go back to with, wanting more than one, right? Because you never know what's going to hit for somebody and not hit for somebody else, for sure.
Yeah.
And now you mentioned, Helen, about the roof caving in on one of the books that you wrote. And could you tell us a little bit about that? Because, I mean, to me, one of the things that would be interesting from both Lisa and yourself is like some examples of where a beta reader really like made a difference and you had to make a change to accommodate that and it helped you in some valuable way. So tell us about the roof caving in.
Well, it was real fun. That was. This was after draft 2. And I thought this is, because I always think this after draft 1. But I actually went through and did 2 drafts on this one. So I knew that this was a Nobel Prize winning thriller. It was fantastic, or Pulitzer or whatever. And I sent it out to my 2 guys and oh God, it was dreadful. I mean, the one didn't like an element that ran throughout the story about this little boy. And it just annoyed me that she didn't like it. And only later on when I got other beta, but that wasn't the roof falling in. The roof falling in was, it didn't thrill. And my other reader said, you have to put something in here, which was basically the middle act, the second act, where it needed another thrill. And I put in 2. And it made all the difference. But of course, you don't just do that. It requires you to go back to the beginning and not restructure, but feed it in there. So it doesn't just bam happen, at least not for you. There are seeds of it in there. So it builds, and that was what I meant by the roof falling. And it took me, I think, a month to make those changes before I was ready. And then I knew I had a bestseller,
I think that's such wonderful metaphor for it, though, with the roof caving in, because you're right. It's like you have something that happens in your story, and then if you remove that, it's like, oh, then this doesn't happen, then this person doesn't know this, and you're right. You have to do the breadcrumbs leading up to it.
Yeah, and following it. I mean, it really requires not exactly a rewrite, I suppose. Yeah, it's not a good thing, but I was getting used to the thriller format, which Lisa's probably well used to, but where there's a thrill a minute. I'm a sedentary person and I like to sit there and read. So I didn't want to provide a thrill a minute. It's too much. It's too nerve-wracking, but that's what was demanded. And so that's what I had to put in. And that was an invaluable service from that reader.
I had a similar experience, different, opposite in terms of the feedback I got, but definitely a roof falling in feeling. It was my second supernatural thriller. So it was an installment story. So it was the second installment, and a writing instructor agreed to read it for me just as a favor. I'd taken other workshops with him, and he said, "Oh, I won't charge you for this. I know you're writing, like you're not going to have too many points of view or be all over the place." And I confidently sent it off and said, "Oh no, there won't be that much to do." And I got his feedback, and he's like, "Okay, you have like 15 point of view characters. No one can keep track of this." And he said, "There's too many elements. Like, what is this thing doing here? Why is that an issue? You've just got too much." And it was similar. I knew it was just almost done when I sent it to him, and I got it back and realized I had to take it apart and simplify it and focus more. So I remember going on a cleaning binge, which is not my thing at all, but for like a day, all I did, I cleaned out cabinets. Because I was I couldn't even think about the book. And then I went back after 2 days and read his comments again, and I trusted him. So I knew he had given me great advice before. I knew it was good advice. I just was overwhelmed. And I had to spend I was working a lot of hours at the time at my job as a lawyer. So it probably took me another 6 months to take it apart and revise it. But I am so grateful to him for doing that and giving me that honest feedback.
Yeah.
I wonder if anyone's ever given that feedback to George R.R. Martin. I mean, he has how many point of view characters in every book? You need a map. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, just to briefly respond on Lisa's, I feel for you, of course. Anyway, I got that point of view stuff from my editor, and it was an eye-opener as well. There was a particular scene that came after I'd put all these extra thriller elements in that did not work, and it was because there were 3 or 4 different points of view in there. And that's when I really learned about point of view. I mean, it took me a long time, as well as filter words. And I had to go through on my 5th draft and get rid of all that stuff. But yeah, feedback is a wonderful thing from wherever it comes from.
And the advantage of having beta readers, I guess, is that it's private to you. I mean, I got so much feedback from the bad reviews I got in my early books that helped me write better reviews in the future. But the problem is those bad reviews exist there. And foolishly, readers are always like, "Oh, I'll go back and read their first book." And it's like, no. Go read my latest book. And then work your way backwards.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing too. Like you, as a writer who is choosing to hire beta readers, first of all, like we said, you need that thick skin, but you have to be, I think, also look at things from a critical perspective in terms of you don't have to agree with the feedback you get, right? Like, but at the same time, you don't. There's 2 sides to that. There's the authors that think that all the feedback they get that isn't positive is wrong, and I've seen that, right? And then I'm like, well, then why did you want beta readers, right? If you're going to ignore everything they say. But then there's also the thing where one person mentions something that's clearly, they have their own issues they're working through, and then the author starts obsessing about it, thinking that it's this huge problem, when sometimes it's not. Sometimes, the person that's beta reading has their own baggage they're bringing to reading. And so you sometimes have to, that's to Helen's point of, if you have to deal with that over 10 or 20 beta readers, it can be exhausting, depending on who they are and what kind of feedback they give, you might have to decipher some of it, right?
Yeah, my Chicago beta reader, she does comment on the rest of the book, but she doesn't read. Not only does she not read mysteries, she really rarely reads fiction. She prefers nonfiction. And so over time, I learned exactly that. With some of her feedback was so unique to it's very hard for her to immerse herself in a fictional world. So things that you would expect in a mystery detective to do, she's like, well, no one would do that in real life. And I'm like, right. And, in real life, people who aren't police detectives or licensed investigators don't usually investigate crimes, but it's kind of a conceit of the genre. And so I still listen carefully to her feedback, and because it could still be accurate, but I weigh it against the feedback from people who love the genre, and that on those issues, plot turns, or to Helen's point, like how many twists do you need? How many thrills do you need? It's more helpful to get someone who is steeped in that genre.
Yeah, I think, there's different types of thrillers, obviously, and there's the Dan Brown kind where pretty much every chapter ends on a cliffhanger, like a big cliffhanger. Those are the ones I used to read a lot. And then there's some where it's more of a, throughout the book, the story itself is just the thriller, right? So yeah, I can totally see how, depending on what you're reading and depending on the type of book that your beta readers might like, you have to weigh that feedback, right? For sure. Did you I want to go back a little bit to what Helen was saying earlier. I like the idea that you sort of stagger your beta readers, and I think that's really important in a lot of cases. I think in some cases, like you might have on your first go around a book that's really pretty much close to done, right? And your beta readers might tell you it's great. And actually I had an author recently use the service, and all the feedback they got was really positive. It was detailed, but there wasn't a lot for her to work on, and she was like, it was confusing to her. She was questioning, and I'm like, it could be you just wrote a good book, right? Because like I look back at what those beta readers had said for other people's book, and there's lots of criticisms, right? But sometimes, you hit the mark that you were looking to do, right? And if that's the case, then you don't have to do a massive rewrite. You certainly don't need multiple rounds of beta readers. But in the cases where the roof falls in on you and you have to do a complete new rewrite or a substantial new rewrite, then it makes sense to want to do another round after that, because you've just changed a lot of the book. You might have been fixing one problem but introduced some other ones, right? So yeah. Do you do that too, Lisa? Or
it depends where I'm at with. I have two different series, and with the earlier books, I definitely did that because I did have that experience of, oh, I thought this was working and a whole lot isn't. And then generally with both, as I've gotten to the later books, I've sent my first, second, or usually my third draft is what I send. And it's usually minor things. When I started getting to where the feedback was mainly minor, easily change things, that's when I stopped sending it out as early. But the first couple books in both series is where I sent it after maybe two drafts, mainly because I thought I was sure it was great, but at the same time, I knew there could be some major plot things I needed to change or character, and I didn't want to spend a ton of time rewriting only to perhaps just double down on the problems.
That's a really interesting perspective. Oh, Craig, we've lost you sound-wise.
Yeah, sorry. When you guys look for your beta readers, are you looking for a specific demographic? Or, I mean, obviously you want people that read your genre, but do you look to try to find, male, female, certain age range, certain whatever, or do you just, take whoever because, your readers might be random people too, right? So I know some people are very specific, especially, I mean, if you're writing YA, for example, you probably want people that are in a certain age group, although these days, I read YA, like lots of people read YA, but, there are times where, and, romance, you probably want female readers because that's the majority of the people that would be reading romance, stuff like that. But I don't know, are there specific things you guys look for when you're trying to find a beta reader?
I mainly look for what do they like to read, right. And partly because I'm often surprised by who I think will be my target readers. My main characters are women. One was a young woman, the other is like mid-30s woman, and I always thought, oh, it'd be mostly women reading it, but I tend to get the most reviews from men And, you know, it just surprises me. So it goes to my stereotype view, I guess, of, oh, men won't read a woman hero, but apparently happily they will. So yeah, I look more, what do they love reading?
Interesting.
I think that's oh, sorry. No, go right ahead, Helen.
Well, I was only going to say, I throw it out there, and I like you, I have my own preconceptions of who likes my work, and I think I'm totally wrong, but I don't worry about that. I think I should worry about it. And now that I'm building a mailing list, I'm trying to get a sense of the type of people they are without being rude and saying, tell me how old you are and where you come from, and you know, going from there. So I think any beta reader from any background can bring something to it, like any person. So I don't mind. You know, it would be good if they like the genre. That's all.
Yeah.
I think that especially helps in genres that have, you know, pretty demanding structures. Like in romance, there is a very specific circle of a story that you have to tell, and somebody who's not a romance reader, they can obviously give you lots of input on certain things, but there's going to be a romance reader who's going to be like, oh yeah, your story beats are out or something like that, and they're going to be able to tell you, give you that feedback in a way other people might not.
Yeah, I've heard that about romance. One of my stories I used to market as a romance, but I was told it really isn't, even though it's got a strong romantic line in it, but it doesn't follow the tropes of the genre. So don't market it to that. They'll only be disappointed. So I don't.
Brilliant advice.
Well, yes, it's good to know these things. Sometimes it takes years to discover, but yeah, I think it goes back to my roots, though. I like to read anything, and I'm glad to have a reader read my book who reads anything. They don't have to follow the genre, although I think it's better if they do. But I want to get the gut reaction. That's what I want from the later beta readers, anyway, or from some of them. That's all.
Yeah, I think it helps too if you know something about the beta readers, so that at least, even if you're getting somebody random, it's good to know maybe some information about them to know whether or not, you know, the perspective that they have is couched in their prior history and knowledge and as a person, right? So if you get certain feedback, maybe you don't care if they're male or female, but maybe it's helpful to know if they're male or female when you're reading certain types of feedback, because that might sort of make you think, okay, yeah, I get that from a male perspective or a female perspective, right?
And you know, Lisa, what you said was very interesting about how you were surprised how many men were interested in reading that. I think there are lots of preconceptions we've got that are sort of carried over from legacy publishing. Like I used to have a friend who wrote historical fiction, and her publisher, her traditional publisher, made her change her name to something androgynous because, you know, men won't read historical fiction by a woman. And that, I don't think that's true. I mean, you talk about strong female protagonists. I had a conversation with a friend who read thrillers, and we were talking about how it's really exciting to read thrillers written by women with female protagonists, because the female protagonists are strong and seem real in a way that in Hollywood, where they're like, we need a strong female character, we'll teach her karate. And it's like, no, these are actual real female characters who are strong, and men don't care. Men just want to read these stories, and it comes across as more real and more authentic. So
yeah, when I started, I published my first novel in 2011, and a lot of people asked me, aren't you going to either use initials? I would have to totally change my name, because Lilly as a last name still sounds, people think, oh, that's a woman writer. And at the time I just didn't want to. I like my name. I think it's a good name. My parents did a great job choosing it. And also as part of my marketing, I knew a lot of people. As a lawyer, I wanted those people to see my name on the book and think about buying it. So I kept it. But yeah, I think you're right. A lot of it is from traditional publishing. And the thought was that no one's going to buy a book by a woman, a thriller by a woman.
And you think about it, like the worst people I know, I still couldn't ever imagine being, oh, I didn't buy that book because it was written by a woman.
Right. You're right. And how often, unless it's Dan Brown, how often is it just the author's name that's selling the book?
Yeah.
So I don't look other than to authors I already follow. But if I like a book, I don't look at it and say, I don't like that author's name. That's a guy, or that's a woman, or whatever it is. I don't like their author photo. That has nothing to do with that.
Yeah. I used to be a great fan of, what's his name? Tom Clancy.
Oh, yes.
And I was told, well, women don't like Tom Clancy. He's too technical. And I tend to skip through the technical. He really did get very technical, but I loved his books. And I don't think I was the only woman who loved his books. Give me a break.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think another genre where that is a big deal is romance, where most people want their romance to be written by a woman. And I know a lot of authors, myself and Roland included, that wrote romance very successfully, but we used female pen names, right? Because that's what sold the books. And, at the time, and even now, there were very few romance novels written by clearly male names. I can really only think of like one that was very successful at the time in self-publishing. But I feel like that's one of those ones where there still is a stigma there. And, maybe rightfully so, but I think, like we say, don't judge a book by its cover, maybe don't judge an author by their gender, but, who knows?
That's amazing. Huh.
Well, we are wrapping up to the end of the hour. So I guess, even though this conversation is wonderful, I think we should probably continue it for another few hours, but we'll slowly wrap things up. I was going to say, now, Lisa, people who have been fascinated by what you've said and things like that, where can they find out more about you? Where can they go and find your work?
My fiction at lisalilly.com. So, and Lilly is Lilly. And my books for writers at writingasasecondcareer.com.
And Helen,
and thank you so much.
Oh, well, and Helen, where can people come and find your books?
Well, they're all on Amazon, but my site is helenyeomans.com, and that's Yeomans. But I mean, whatever. And that's it, I suppose.
Oh, well, we will put links down below.
And thank you. As Lisa said, I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been great. But I mean, yeah, it's Craig we need to thank, because this is Craig's idea, and also wrap us up, Craig, with a bit of talk about beta readers.
Yeah, I really appreciate you both coming on, and I think this really was a really good discussion about beta readers for authors that haven't used them before. Hopefully, this sort of gives them an idea of what they can expect, why they should use them, and the benefits that they can really get out of it, which I think a lot of authors could really do, improve their careers by improving their books, by getting this sort of feedback before they publish, as opposed to waiting for the reviews to tell them and then having to start again on the next book with that one sort of hanging out there with bad reviews. It doesn't mean that you can't write a good book without a beta reader, but sometimes it's a good idea to sort of get that feedback and then work on it, and just have a thick skin, be open to what people say, but don't feel like you have to act on it if you completely disagree with it, right? So anyway, thanks again for coming on and talking with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that has been wonderful. So hopefully you all enjoyed this episode of Fully Booked. If you did, make sure that if you haven't already, click that subscribe button or that follow button, give us a like, leave a comment down below. Make sure you check out Lisa's work. Make sure you check out Helen's work. And we will be back very soon with another episode of Fully Booked. So stay tuned. Thank you very much.